Hey everybody, and welcome back to Cityscape Brewing. I'm Dennis Fields, and if you've been to my channel before, you know that I've raved about Sierra Nevada's Celebration IPA. Probably one of my top 5 favorite beers ever, and right now it's after Christmas and those things are becoming non-existent. This beer starts showing up in October or November every year, and it starts getting its way off the shelves by Christmas time. So if you want to have this thing year round, I'm going to show you how to brew it yourself. Right after you hit that like and subscribe button, grab yourself a beer, and we're gonna get after it. Last year, I made a video trying to clone this beer, and it came out almost exact. I actually was really surprised how close I was actually able to get the recipe. But there were some differences that I think I can make the recipe even better. Because I remember when I tried this beer, I said this. So the one thing I can pick out between the two of them is I think this one has a little bit of actual bitterness compared to this one. Is a little bit more malty, but the malt flavor is the same. And I think if we kicked up the bitterness a little bit in mine, it actually would turn out perfectly. So in order to make it a little less malty, a little bit more hop forward, and a little bit more aromatic, I decided to make small minor tweaks to this recipe in order to go for perfection. I'll have that video down below in the video description so you can watch it and do the whole brew day video, because today we're really just talking about the tweaks, and we're going to see if those tweaks really impact the flavor of this beer. I didn't make any changes to the malt bill whatsoever. I think it was spot on color-wise. I thought it was spot on flavor-wise. There was a little bit more malty characteristic that I liked, so I did a few things to dial that in, and the aroma I thought was better on the original, so I did some things to increase that chances of getting more aroma in my final product. So for this recipe, here are the changes that I'm about to make. First things first, I increased the bitterness by about 5 IBUs, and really the only change that I made there was changing from Cascade to Centennial at the 30-minute mark. So that will give it a few more alpha acids there, and it will increase the IBUs from 65 to 70 IBU. I also add a half more ounce of Centennial in the dry hop that will hopefully give the beer a little bit more hoppy aromatics at the end. I'm also decreasing the mash temperature. Last year I was shooting at 154 or so for the mash temperature, which is a little high. We'll hang on to some of those sugars and we'll actually give it a little bit more of a malty characteristic. This time I'm going to be dropping that mash temperature to about 150, which will allow some of those sugars to be fermented out and make the beer a little bit more dry. I've also tweaked my water addition slightly. And again, this is going to vary depending on where you are and your water profiles. But generally I added a little bit more SO4 by adding some gypsum and some Epsom salt in there that will give it a little bit more bitterness in the beer rather than more malty flavor. So rather than being more balanced, I wanted to be a little bit more on the bitter side. I'll have a video in the description that talks about water profiles and pH, and you can go ahead and check that out and you'll be able to see for yourself how to adjust those accordingly. Last but not least, I actually changed the yeast that I'm using in this beer, rather than USO5, which is what I used in the original recipe last year. I did make a 1 liter starter for our yeast. I have that finished. It's now cold crashed in my fridge. We're gonna go ahead and decant that off before we pitch it into our fermenter today. So with all that said, we're gonna make those minor tweaks. We're gonna brew this beer again, and we're gonna see if all of those tweaks paid off. Cheers. As always, I'll have the full recipe in the video description below. So we went through the full brew day from milling the grains to mashing in, recirculating and vorloffing, getting the final runnings, bringing that up to a boil, adding my DIY hop spider, which you can see how to make that in the link in the video description. Then we added our first round of hops, which was 1 ounce of Chinoook at 60 minutes. Then a second round at 30 minutes of Centennial, a teaspoon of yeast nutrient at about 10 minutes, and then 1 ounce each of Cascade and Centennial in the Whirlpool, which I let sit at about 170 degrees for 10 minutes. I cooled that down and transferred to the fermenter. I added my tilt hydrometer and took a gravity reading quick, and then attached the dry hops to the side of the fermenter with the sous vide magnets. Last, I swirled around the yeast and pitched it in. This was Omega's West Coast Ale 1. Fermentation was going strong after about 48 hours, and then after fermentation was fully completed, I pulled those magnets off, let the hops fall in, and then I let those sit at the same fermentation temperature for about 5 days. After day 5 of dry hopping, I went ahead and cold crashed that down. I got it racked to a keg and all carved up. So without further ado, let's go ahead and crack a couple of these open, grab one of mine out of the kegerator, and let's see how they turned out.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the main event. In the right corner, we have Sierra Nevada, a professional nationwide brewer brewing Celebration IPA. And in the left corner, the challenger, Cityscape Brewing, some dude who brews in his dirty garage. Who will come out on top? Find out now.
The first thing you're going to notice about these two beers is the color and the fact that they look identical. And that was the same as the first time that I brewed these, which is the reason why I did not change the grain bill one bit, because I thought the color was spot on, and it still is. The head on both are this white, creamy, foamy head. Well, the real Sierra Nevada has a little bit more of a rocky appearance than my homebrewed version on the left. Surprisingly, they're both about the same amount of clarity too. Part of it is because the glass is kind of sweating a little bit, but they're not, neither one are crystal clear. That was similar the first time that I brewed this as well. I think it mostly happens to be the malt choices that are used in these two beers. So enough about the color, we know they look the same. Let's go in for some aroma and flavor tests. So the first time I did this, I thought the aroma on the original Sierra Nevada actually had a lot more hoppy characteristics, and this one smelled even a little bit more malty. So let's see the difference this time. This is the real Celebration Ale. And I still get that same aroma that I got last year, obviously, and which is that citrus, crisp, and hoppy aroma. And on mine, surprisingly, I get that as well. Not quite as much as the original, but I definitely do get it. Last time I smelled a little bit more malty flavored, and I could tell, but this time I think they're going to be fairly similar when I taste them side by side. Let's hope. So let's dive right in. First, we're gonna do the real thing, Sierra Nevada. Again, you've heard me say this before, probably one of my favorite winter beers that comes out. I look forward to this every year. Just a solid beer, and when you notice this, and some of the first things that you pick out with this beer is the crispness and still getting that IPA flavors that you're looking for, the crisp, the bite, and the bitterness, and you get those West Coast hop additions, which are both citrusy and piney all at the same time. So let's see how I did with this one. Man, that is so close. There's very little differences in this beer at all. Last year, when I was tasting these side by side, I noticeably could tell mine was a little more malty. And even though it was like that, I've said this before, I didn't change the grain bill whatsoever. All I did was change my water additions a little bit, I changed my mash temperature a little bit, and I upped the amount of bitterness, added a little bit more dry hops. But the mouthfeel and the flavor of the malts was drastically changed to be more complementary to the original style just by doing those things, not because of the malt choice. As a reminder, the mash temperature I lowered from 154 to 150. I added Centennial hops at the 30-minute mark instead of Cascade hops to give it a few more alpha acids / IBUs, right? A little bit more bite, if you will. And we added some different water additions that is gonna bring out that West Coast hoppy flavor. I think the aroma hops helped a little bit by adding a little bit more of the dry hops in this one, but I honestly don't think it did all that much. I probably would even need to do maybe an ounce more to match Sierra Nevada's aroma. One of the things I was a little worried about was I really went out on a limb to change the yeast, and we didn't talk about that much. Last year I used Safe Ale's US-05, which is a clean ale yeast. A lot of people call it a Chico yeast. This year I used Omega's West Coast Ale, and I think that helped add a little bit of the fruity characteristics to this beer to keep it in line with Sierra Nevada's house Chico yeast. And so I think that's what really makes some of these larger brands like Sierra Nevada and Bell's, they have a proprietary yeast that they have as a house blend that gives that extra kind of citrusy character in their clean ale yeasts. And so in this particular case, I think that the Omega's West Coast Ale 1 that I used is actually really, really close to the real thing. All in all, I don't know that I could tweak this any more to make it any more similar. I'm blown away with how close those two are. I mean, really blown away. I hope you guys found this really informative. I love doing these type of things because it just goes to show you that there are always ways that you can improve as a brewer, and it helps you learn a little bit more about the chemistry of brewing by changing a little bit of these things in your recipe each time. So with that, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps the channel tremendously. The recipe, as always, is down in the video description. Leave any comments and questions that you have below too. I love answering your guys' questions. Happy brewing and cheers. Hey, thanks for watching my video. I really do appreciate it. A way you can support the channel is just by buying me a beer. There's a button right there on the screen, and there's a link in the video description below. You can also check out the merchandise in our store, and you can hit the video on the screen right now. You know you want to.